the podcast with Dan Bardell and Gregg Evans.
Hello, welcome back to the 1874 podcast with myself, Dan Bardell, and the Athletics' Gregg Evans. This show is sponsored by NordVPN, and you can grab your exclusive NordVPN deal by going to 1874.io/NordVPN. If you do that, you'll get a huge discount off Nord's plan, and you'll also get 4 months for free. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee, and we'll hear a little bit more about NordVPN later on in the show. After a week's hiatus on the 1874 podcast, obviously we've been doing other shows, but the 1874 podcast with myself and Gregg has been on hiatus because, Gregg, you are now a father. So I'm sure everyone will wish you a massive congratulations. I know I do. And how are you finding fatherhood so far?
Yeah, morning, Dan, and thanks for that. Appreciate it. It's been a pretty hectic couple of weeks. Nice to have some proper time off with the little one and get used to fatherhood. No, it's brilliant, wonderful. Can't complain at all. All happy times and lasting memories, I'm sure. But yeah, all good, mate. Thank you. So appreciate it.
And you'll be getting him down the golf course as soon as possible, I'm sure.
Oh yeah. I've been looking at golf outfits already, trying to match up with Daddy. So let's see.
Excellent stuff. I mean, is he going to be like, you know, people say like Project Mbappe when they have a child? Is yours going to be like Project Mbappe, or will it be like Project Tiger Woods? That my golf knowledge is so limited that was the only golfer I could think of.
No, we won't be pushing him into anything. We'll let him have his own life and make his own decisions, and we'll give him all the love and support that he needs. It's as simple as that.
You're so media trained with an answer like that.
What do you mean?
It's just so media trained.
How is he?
You know, people say footballers are do media trained. No, you're definitely do media trained with an answer like that. I know, absolutely. You'll be pushing him on the golf course as soon as possible. Let's talk about Aston Villa Football Club then, Gregg. Decent point at the weekend. I think the fact that, you know, Villa missed a couple of good chances in stoppage time probably takes the shine off it a little bit. But I was just saying to you before we came on, overall, I think considering the injuries, getting used to playing in Europe and getting pumped on the first day by Newcastle as well, Villa's start has been absolutely magnificent. To be fifth at this point of the season, I think it just shows again what a great manager Villa have.
Yeah, 100%. We say week on week, don't we, how impressive Emery is and how good, you know, Villa are becoming now as a team. I think it's been a brilliant start to the season, and, you know, I said that sort of a couple of weeks in. I wasn't too concerned about the opening day defeat at Newcastle. Yeah, it was, you know, humiliating, the manner of it, but I didn't think it would have a lasting impact on the season, or certainly not define the season. And Villa have bounced back since, and look, you know, they're 4 points off the top of the league after eight games, currently sitting in fifth position. They've won 5 games and drawn 1 out of 8. So it's a really positive start. And, you know, they've actually got underway in the Europa Conference League as well now, and are heading into that really important double-header with AZ Alkmaar in pretty good shape, I think. And, you know, I'm backing Villa to go on and have a better season than they did last season now. Pretty confident with that.
So I've watched a lot of Manchester United. I've watched a lot of Chelsea so far this season. I know it's early days, in particular for Chelsea, not quite clicking. But I think when you watch them and the jobs their managers have had to come in and do, I kind of feel like Villa have got such a good manager that actually if Unai Emery went into either of those clubs, because of the way he picked Villa up, I actually think he'd do a better job than Ten Hag or Pochettino are doing at Chelsea. I just think he's such a high level manager. And with every passing week, I start to think, other than Pep, is there a better manager in the Premier League? And, you know, I'm sure if you gave Unai Emery Pep's resources, he'd be pretty good.
I mean, he had a lot of resources at PSG, didn't he? And wasn't fully able to sort of secure what PSG wanted. But, you know, in fairness, no manager has since either. So, but yeah, I take your point. I think he's an elite level coach. I've said that sort of from within a couple of months of him joining Villa and speaking to people who've worked with him and, you know, been around football for a long time. Obviously, you know, us from the outside looking in, we can have our own opinions, but it's when you sort of speak to people that have been in the game for a long time, have played under different managers, have worked under different managers, have seen, you know, their methods of, you know, preparation. And then you get to realise just how intense he is and how actually genuinely good at his job he is. But another thing, he has got a very, very strong support network alongside him. And, I've said this on previous podcasts. I do feel that although Villa were in a bad place in terms of their results, I think the structures that they had at the club when Emery arrived were really strong. And if you look at Manchester United and Chelsea, for example, the two of them are in a bit of a mess, really. Chelsea, it's a complete transition for them. They've moved on from the Roman Abramovich era and are now under new owners who, have been very controversial in the way that they're sort of shaping the squad and are changing things at Chelsea. It feels like, for example, Graham Potter was not a bad manager, but he's walked into a bit of a mess at the club and has had to, react in that way. Manchester United have got sort of internal problems as well. I do feel really sorry for Ten Hag in a way, because he's had so much to deal with Ronaldo, Anthony, Mason Greenwood, lots of other problems at the club as well. The Harry Maguire situation. Whereas at Villa, they've been quite a stable club for a couple of seasons now and are moving on in the right directions. And that's because of, real solid leadership right from the top in Nassif Sawiris and Wes Edens. They set really high standards, hired good people, and that helped. The only thing really that was missing was just that elite level coach to bring it all together. And pretty much that's what we're seeing now. It just feels like it's not like Villa is a good fit for Emery, because he's done it at a lot of other clubs before. He was a little bit unfortunate at Arsenal. He moved in at perhaps the wrong time, coming in to replace Arsene Wenger, and at PSG it didn't quite go to plan because he didn't deliver the European success, and he won one title out of the 2 seasons rather than 2, which he really should be doing at PSG. But look at the success he had at Valencia, making them the 3rd best team in Spain behind Barcelona and Real Madrid, who were managed by Mourinho and Guardiola at the time, and then what he did at Sevilla, the way he turned Villarreal around. And I'm confident, he's going to take Villa on up as well.
Yeah, I know managers need time. I don't think you ever should be sacking a manager in season 1, really, unless it's an absolute disaster. But you look at Spurs as well. Postecoglou's coming. If you get the hire right and pick the right manager, they can come in and transform the side, because Spurs as well were going nowhere, and now they're top of the league, and he just kind of gets the culture, gets what the club's about. And I feel the same with Emery. He just gets Villa, and I've always thought, Villa needs someone who knows about the club. They should hire a manager who's got some kind of affiliation, some history with the club, has perhaps played with them. Always felt Villa were better, when John Gregory was manager, Brian Little was manager. But Unai Emery's proven that actually you don't need to have had anything to do with Villa before to be the right fit and be the right manager. And standards are so high now that I was in the away end at the weekend. You're almost there expecting to win, and when Villa don't win, it almost feels alien to you, because we've picked up so many wins under this coach.
Yeah, and look, that's the new challenge really now at Villa, is managing those expectations, because fans do believe now they're going to every game almost expecting not only a performance but a result, and when those inevitably don't come, there are going to be questions as to why it didn't work out, why the win wasn't secured, etc. And look, Villa have got a lot of games this season. There was a real backlash actually that I'd noticed after the Carabao Cup defeat to Everton, and Villa are going to lose games this season. It's just important that they don't lose the ones that really matter, if that kind of makes sense. And I think on the back of looking 2 weeks on from that defeat to Everton, now they're in a much better position. They're 5th in the table. They're up underway in the Europa Conference League. And that Everton game's almost forgotten about a bit now, isn't it? But I do understand the frustration, because Villa fans of a certain age, under the age of 30, if you're under the age of 30, you've never seen Villa win anything, have you? So
no.
Supporters want to see that. But I had a little look actually just to see how many other clubs had won a trophy since Villa last won one. And I mean, you've got the typical, the so-called big 6. They've all won one except for Tottenham. And then I think there was only about 8 other clubs that actually won something.
I know, but some of the teams on that list, it's like Middlesbrough.
Yeah,
Wigan,
I mean Middlesbrough, Wigan, Birmingham City. if you're a Villa fan, you kind of expect to be among that group, don't you? And that's what's the most frustrating. But it's really, really difficult to win something. Villa have been there in finals and just not quite delivered on the day. But I just think going out of the Carabao Cup early wasn't the worst thing, and it was maybe a little bit of an overreaction.
I think because they went on to beat Brighton 6-1 a few days after that game, that's obviously helped. But football's all about recency bias, and if you win the next game, everything is forgotten. People only ever really remember the last result. But I think Villa 10 points from 12 from the last 4 games, like I say, underway now in the Europa Conference League. It's been a really good time. And if you look at the fixtures to come as well, like every game's hard, but I'd look at those, especially at Hudden in the next one at home. West Ham are really flying under the radar this season. They're starting to come a little bit over the radar now, if that's a sign. I think they've had a great start to the season, and they're a team that Villa find it difficult to play against normally. But then so are Wolves. Villa go to Molineux and lose normally, so on the face of it, a 1-1's not a bad result. But at home, I'd really back Villa to beat anyone. They're 10 in a row in the Premier League at home, which is absolutely phenomenal. So I look at the next few games coming up and think, no reason why we can't stay unbeaten and get a little bit of a run going. But it's a magnificent start of the season. To be sat fifth at this stage going into the second international break, I'm absolutely delighted with that. Was it like a few days ago? It was a year since Villa drew 1-1 at Forest on Monday Night Football. I remember watching that game thinking,
bad one, wasn't it? Yeah.
We are terrible. We are going nowhere. If you'd have told me a year later, we're in Europe, we're fifth in the Premier League, we've got a world-class manager, sometimes you've got to sit back and think, wow, we are in a very good place. The main topic we want to focus on this week is Johan Lange, Gregg. Off to Tottenham Hotspur. I think he's been hired as a technical director there. I've got to be honest, I'm not 100% sure what his actual job title is at Villa at the moment. But am I right in thinking that it was inevitable he was going to leave? Because although he took up a new role within the V Sports group, it did feel like he'd been squeezed out a little bit with Monchi's arrival.
Yeah, and I think he kind of expected it as well. As soon as Emery arrived, the owners promised Emery, the keys to the castle, and that included the opportunity for Emery to bring in his own sporting director. We knew that Lange was the sporting director for 3 years. He was very highly regarded by the owners, and that's one of the reasons why he stayed on when Monchi came. Obviously, Emery wanted to bring in Mateo Alemany from Barcelona. That was his first choice. Villa weren't able to get that deal done, so they moved on to Monchi, and it was something that the people behind the scenes at Villa were always expecting, because they knew Emery was going to bring in his own man. So for Lange, his role changed slightly. Yeah, he was a sporting director for 3 seasons, but was moved into like a role sort of overseeing youth development and international academies. A very long-winded title, and lots of people were saying to me that very, very highly regarded at the club. He'd done an excellent job. If an opportunity came for him to move on, then they expected him to take that. And I think it was quite similar in a way to Christian Purslow. Purslow was also offered the opportunity to stay at Villa.
Oh, was they? I didn't know
in
that.
A slightly diminished role, and he didn't really fancy it, so he immediately left. He wanted to be that he wanted to have that all-encompassing role that he'd had previously. Lange was, happy to sort of stay on board and see what happened. And I think it's a great opportunity for him to go to Tottenham,
really
because it feels like Tottenham are building a really exciting project. That they're finally hiring good people. They've got an excellent manager in there. I said to you, Dan, in the week, didn't I? They've hired 3 of the nicest guys in football in Postecoglou, James Maddison, and now Johan Lange. So
he's not put Jedinak in there. Still scared of him.
Still scared after our podcast, really. I mean, look, on a serious note, Jedinak is a top guy, but wouldn't sort of class him as one of the nice guys in football. He's got a bit of a mean streak to him.
I'm still frightened of him.
So really interesting to see what the project, how the project evolves at Tottenham. I think Lange will go in there and he's going to do a good job, because look at what he did at Villa. Villa are unrecognisable now compared to when he arrived in the summer of 2020 to replace Jesus Garcia Patash, also known as Suso. as you'll remember. The owners wanted at that point to professionalise a few of the departments at the club, and just modernise it, and just build the infrastructure. Because if you remember, Villa were a club trying to re-establish themselves as a Premier League sort of force again, not just in terms of results, but in terms of infrastructure at the club. There'd been a lot of mismanagement, hadn't there, for years? If you think back to a couple of years before the relegation, and then the 3 years in the Championship, Villa were always falling behind in the Championship and needed to get back into the Premier League quickly to help rebuild. And Lange came in with this. He had a brief really to create to help build a squad that would help get Villa pushing for the top 10 within 3 seasons. And to be fair to him, he did that. Look, Villa missed out under Gerrard, but then they got there under Emery. And there are a lot of good things that he's done. I don't know where you want me to start. I think that if we go through some of the sort of maybe non-sexy stuff that maybe listeners aren't fully aware of,
this is actually what I wanted to say.
How important, you've got to understand how important some of the behind the scenes stuff is. I mean, we can get onto perhaps signings because a bit later, because that's the thing that people will remember, sporting directors and chief executives and managers and recruitment people for. Who did he sign? Who were good? Who were crap? Let's go from there. But you can't judge people on that fully. So if you want me to go through some of the things that you helped rebuild at Bodymoor Heath, I'm happy to do that, and we can move on to signings then.
I do want you to do that, because I was going to say to you, first off, it's a great move for him going to Spurs. He's obviously got something. If Spurs have come in and identified him and picked him up, again, it shows how quickly things can change in football, because everyone's talking about Spurs being an absolute mess. Suddenly they've got a good manager, and now everyone's like, everything's there at Spurs. They've got the right manager.
We thought they were going to struggle, didn't we?
Yeah, and it's the same with Villa. A year ago everything was crap. And then they get the right manager in, and it feels like everything's good, because ultimately it is the results on the pitch that matter. And like you say, with the sporting director, they'll ultimately be judged on the signings. But I think you've touched on some great stuff already on your little build-up that you've done there, in that, yes, you can judge a sporting director on signings, but he actually will have changed a number of things behind the scenes, which you're going to come on to, that he should be judged on that as well. Because like you said, Villa had lagged behind. I remember in 2017 or 2018, maybe, sitting down with Keith Wyness and interviewing him about the Villa engine, and he was talking about Steve Round, who was the director of football at the time. And honestly, I was sat there as someone who was quite naive, quite new to interviewing people and being involved in football. I sat there thinking, this is nothing. Like, he isn't saying anything here. He's talking about his Villa engine, but there's nothing there. Johan Lange has said less. Actually, the proof of what he'll have done behind the scenes at Bodymoor and the way Villa operate now, with transfers, with loans, with youth recruitment, that's all changed, and it'll be down to him.
Yeah, he certainly played a big role in it. I think in some of the previous guys' defence, almost. I mean, they didn't fully have the backing from the owners. I think we have to go right to the top at Villa and look at how engaged and how enthusiastic and how willing they are to invest money into the club as a starting point. Suarez and Edens have heavily backed Villa. They've been willing to improve all the departments at the club, as well as strengthening the squad and trying to take the club forward. So anybody who is in a position of power, i.e. Christian Burslow and Johan Lange and some of the other guys around it, they had that support of the guys up above. So that helps. The money's in there, the interest is in there. Is there. So some of the ideas that they have that fallback in, that helps. But Lange came in, and he first, one of the early things he looked at was sort of like a rebuilding the data department. I don't think Villa particularly had a strong data department at that point. They were, under Suso, there were a lot of signings that were agent led, which is fine. That happens in football. If there are strong relationships, then sporting directors and managers and owners, etc., turn to agents, and agents play a massive part. You need them to be on the side to help get the best players into the club. But I think what Villa wanted was a bit of a deeper look into signings. If we're buying a midfielder, or if we're buying a winger or a goalkeeper, we want the data to back it up as to why we are getting that player. And Lange hired a guy called Frederick Leth from Copenhagen, who he worked with. He came in as the head of research, and that was a new role at Villa. Villa have since strengthened that department. They've brought in data scientists, data engineers as well. The department is pretty strong. So when players are signed, a lot of research has gone into it. And look, that's not going to guarantee that Leon Bailey comes in and he's absolutely brilliant ahead of maybe Wilfried Zaha, who Villa were offered at the time as well. But what it does is it shows the owners that if they're investing £30 million, all of the research has been done, and that they have all the tools to see that this is the reason why we're going for this player. We've worked really hard on background checks, data analysis to show why we think he's going to succeed in the Premier League ahead of player B, C and D, etc. And that's what owners want if they're investing a lot of money. So that was one little area that he strengthened at the time, and he brought in some good people. Alex Fraser was the chief scout who Villa hired from Brighton, and then Rob McKenzie came in from Leicester. Rob McKenzie came in on the back of his time at Leicester. He helped put together the 2015 title-winning team, bringing in some of the likes of Kante and Mahrez, players like that. And those hires were really strategic. Brighton were known as a club that had recruited very well. Leicester obviously had that background, and Villa wanted to just bring a little bit of all that together. So they were really specific signings. So that was one area that Lange worked on. If you also remember, they didn't have a loans department back then. There was no loans manager. There was no head of emerging talent. The academy wasn't as strong as it is now. And if you look at some of the players that Villa have signed between sort of the ages of 12 and 17, some of them have already kicked on. Others have the potential to get Villa a fair bit of money back in the future. And another department which I touched on previously in a previous podcast was the player care department. So led by Phil Roscoe previously at Liverpool. I think he's a real unsung hero because Villa have signed a lot of foreign players, and the work that he does alongside Sophia and a few of the other staff just helps them settle in. And it's just a really modern looking Bodymore Heath now. The departments are really, really strong. And a lot of that is down to the sporting director, a little bit of Christian Purslow with his influence as well, and obviously the owners for their continued investment.
Yeah, because there's a difference between a sporting director and a director of football. A director of football is purely transfers, and I think Patricky at Spurs perhaps he was director of football. A sporting director oversees so much of the football club, so you can't just judge Lange on transfers. Yes, no. as I've said, you'll look back at transfers and say that was a good one, that was a bad one, but not all transfers are down to Lange as well. It's quite clear that some of the signings, and we'll know who they were Steven Gerrard led. Yeah. Others were Ollie Watkins led. Emi Martinez, for example. I know Neil Cutler was heavily involved in the recruitment of Emi Martinez, and he was not identifying, but Cutler was pushing for Emi Martinez. But still, then Lange that has to go in and look at all that stuff, and like you say, use the data to say, that is worthwhile. It's worth us doing that. So actually, I read the Athletic article yesterday. It wasn't done by you, but I read the article about him going to Spurs and looked through the comments afterwards, and it was quite a mixed bag, really. Some people saying he's done a good job. Some people saying he'd bought up some absolute duds. Coutinho was referenced in one of the comments, but actually that's not fair, because as his role as sporting director he's going to technical director at Spurs, isn't he?
Yeah.
He has done a lot for Aston Villa, and I don't think I realised that myself until I actually properly thought about it yesterday.
Yeah, and we'll move on to signings because I've got some of my own thoughts on that, but. He's probably saved Villa a fair bit of money as well, because from speaking to player representatives, and he always drove a hard bargain, and he was responsible sometimes for doing some of the contract extensions, and it wasn't a case of, well, this player wants this amount of money, we're going to give it to him. It would be a real strategic negotiation, and that's a real skill as well, to sort of maintain relationships, but also drive a hard bargain for the club as well. So yeah, I think Villa. I think in the long run, Villa might miss him. because he's done a good job. He's helped build a really stable Bodymore Heath with good departments, and I think he's helped him increase the value of the squad. And look, that's typically what technical and sporting directors are there to do, to try and improve the departments and make the club better. So I think he's done that. I think he'll be a good appointment for Tottenham. It'll be interesting to see how the Tottenham project evolves. But yeah. Should we pick through some of his best and worst signings, maybe?
I was just going to say, if he was in any way involved in Douglas Luiz signing a new contract a year ago, then that's a phenomenal bit of business, because there was no right for Douglas Luiz to sign that contract at the time. He wasn't in the team, and Villa were terrible. Now he's arguably Villa's best player, and he's probably worth somewhere around 80 to 100 million, Douglas Luiz.
It's incredible.
If he was involved in that, he deserves a hell of a lot of credit, because he must have persuaded him, because Douglas Luiz, there was no right for him to sign a contract at that point.
No, I think what we've got to be really careful of doing and saying is putting individual players onto individual people, because I think it's a very collective thing. As you mentioned earlier, Dan, sometimes a manager wants a player more, sometimes a sporting director wants a player more, sometimes a chief executive even is pushing for a
few of them. More.
But what you will see is that every time a player comes into the club, it's been signed off by every single important member of staff, shall we say. So it's a collective, and With Douglas Luiz, to answer your question, Villa thought he was going. The Arsenal interest was strengthening, and Villa were trying to say, look, we're not going to let you go. We want to keep you. If you stay with us and stay strong, we will give you a contract extension. When the time is right, and as you'll see, it was just after the transfer window ended. Christian Perslow pushed very, very hard for that and did a lot of the negotiations alongside Joe and Lange. So the two of them worked, in tandem at that. And there's just so much that goes on behind the scenes that you probably won't really see. It's just like having little meetings with the players, and keep week after week, and then staying in touch with the agents and making sure that they're okay, and then trying to fend off other interest and showing him about the project that they're continuing to do and players that they want to bring in and what they're expecting for the future. There's so much that goes on. It's not just a case of, if you stay, we'll give you this and this amount. Please don't go to Arsenal. And look, that's one of the reasons actually why Villa signed Leander Dendoncker, because they did think that Luiz was going to go to Arsenal. But yeah, I'm going to write about him at some point, because I think he's a really interesting story, isn't it? The fact that he's came in and he's had ups and downs, but he's really now a very, very valuable player for Villa.
Who, Luiz or Dendoncker? Yeah, I thought you were talking about Dendoncker. Sorry, for a second now. I actually quite like Dendoncker, but if Luiz had gone and we'd have replaced him with Dendoncker, Villa wouldn't have been as good a football team as they are now. That simply wouldn't have been a fair trade. They're good at very different things, and like I say, I actually like Dendoncker. So let's throw some signings around. So in fairness, when Lange arrived, Villa had a really good transfer window. I'm not sure how far some of their moves were in motion, but that window, Matty Cash, great player for the football club. Ollie Watkins, brilliant player for the football club. Emi Martinez, I think, is the best goalkeeper in the world, in my opinion. And then Traore and Barkley, I think, with that window as well. So that's an unbelievable first window. But I'm not sure how far in motion those moves were at that point. So that's a good one. Sanson, I guess that's one that will get thrown at him. I think every sporting director or every director of football, they have one player that they get associated with. So with Patage, it probably should be Douglas Luiz, but it's Borja Baston. Who signed Borja Baston from the back of the sofa at the last day of the transfer window? Who do you think is Lange's?
Lange's bad one.
Just the one that. Ultimately, I think everyone gets remembered for one signing. If it would get remembered, who would be the one he gets remembered for?
Oh God!
Would it be Sanson? Sanson came up a lot.
Probably, yeah. Probably. I mean, I always look at the two that he pushed quite hard for, because he had them at Copenhagen with Robin Olsen and Ludwig Augustinsson. So the two of them haven't really worked. Didn't really work for Villa, did they? But yeah, look, I mean, I think there's you mentioned, let's go on to the positives and we'll go on to the negatives after. But I think, first of all, I think the good far outweighs the bad.
Yeah, definitely.
What you'll remember is Suso was relieved of his duty, shall we say, or left the day after that West Ham game, wasn't it? And then Lange was appointed the next day, I think, as far as I can remember.
It was an earlier point. I remember it being an early bit of a.
So look, that wasn't a negotiation that took place after the London Stadium when all the players were celebrating back in Birmingham. It was clearly something that had been done way in advance. So there was obviously lots of work that had previously been done and talks and discussions between them. So Villa come in and they that next summer was really impressive. They get Martinez, they get Watkins, they get Matty Cash, they get was it Bertrand Traore as well? That's
around Barkley.
Yeah. So 3 out of those 5 definitely worked really well. And look, Lange did play a big part. Okay, we've spoken to Neil Cutler, both of us previously, and we know the impact that he had on bringing Emi Martinez into the club. But Lange did a lot too. It's really, really, really important to stress that because he's one of Villa's best players, sort of ever, isn't he? Brilliant acquisition. But what you probably don't know of is all the sort of FaceTime calls that they have to do in the background and speaking with the agent and making sure they're all on board. And yeah, Cutler would have done a fair bit of that too. But Lange as the sporting director also played a major part in that. Remember with Matty Cash as well, there was a huge long list of data that was drawn up to show Matty Cash why he would succeed at Villa. Now players want to see that. There's 2 things really that players want. They want to know that they're going to come to a club and play, and they want to know that they're going to get paid pretty well. But when they're moving to a club, they also like to see the presentation and how much they are wanted and where they're going to fit in. And that's something that I think Villa did very well under Lange. The presentations towards players were really impressive, and certainly some of the younger players. So it would be a case of, look, you come here, we're going to get you into an international team. We're going to get you playing regularly in the Premier League. And you look through the players that Villa have signed, Martinez, Watkins, Cash, Buendia, Kamara, all of those hadn't played for their country before. But they've all now playing for their country relatively regularly for since moving to Villa. So that was something that they were very big on behind the scenes. They were creating a project really, saying, look, we're not quite there yet. We're not an elite team. We're not a top 6 team. We can't go and buy the very, very best players yet, but we believe that we can buy players like yourselves who are going to really kick on and be better in the future and come to us and let's grow together. I think Villa have done that really quite well. More recent good signings, I think, of Lange were Kamara, who he worked very, very hard to get. Worked his nuts off behind the scenes to get that one done. Steven Gerrard actually did the final touches to that one. I don't think Kamara would have come if it weren't for Gerrard. I think he was really excited to play under Steven Gerrard. So sometimes you just need that extra pull to get a player through the door. And Diego Carlos as well. Villa did a lot of background checks and work on that to get him in, early ahead of other clubs that were interested in him in Champions League. And look, we don't really know about John Duran yet, but the signs are pretty positive. We think that he's going to go on and be a relatively good player for Villa. And that was probably Lange's last real move, because all of the other signings that have come in since have been Emery pushing those through. So those were the good ones. I think if you look at the bad ones, Sanson definitely, Traore, never been convinced with him. I think Villa.
I would put that down as a bad one. He scored some important goals last season that got Villa into Europe, which is extra revenue. And I'd also say his first season, he wasn't far off double figures for goals and got about six assists.
Yeah, it's true.
I wouldn't say that was a bad one. I wouldn't say anyway.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's a fair comment. I just never really feel like he's fully established himself and kicked on and justified the money. Maybe he has justified the money with the amount of goals that he scored. So yeah,
I guess you could say, was he better
he's
than
a hit
the
and
wingers
miss
that were
one,
there
isn't he?
previously?
Somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. Was he better than Trezeguet or El Ghazi? Maybe not. Maybe a similar level of frustration with him.
Yeah.
I would say Sanson. Look, that was a not disaster, but 13 million at the time was a lot of money. And he's come in and done essentially nothing at the football club, and 3 managers have been there and said, "No, I'm not going to play. Can't play this guy." So that tells me that's a bad signing. The window when they lost Grealish and they signed Ings, Bailey, and Buendia. Now Bailey and Buendia and Ings did, to be fair, they've all done positive things for the football club at times. But probably that window will go down as not a success, not a good recovery process in losing Jack Grealish. If you look at West Ham have lost Declan Rice, and so far it looks like what they've done to replace him, they actually look a better team. Villa lost Grealish and didn't look a better team with the players that they brought in.
Yeah, and again, look, I think it's really tough. Lange's actually going into a club trying to replace Harry Kane, isn't he, as well? So he's
not done a bad job of that so far.
He's got experience of that, but I think it's really difficult for a club to expect to lose their best player and then become better. Tottenham are probably. Nobody expected Tottenham to be better with Harry Kane disappearing. Nobody really expected West Ham to be any better with Declan Rice going, and it's still too soon to say on both of those regards.
The early signs are good.
The early signs are good, admittedly, yeah. But when Villa lost Grealish, it was pretty inevitable that it was going to be difficult for them to get any better. I do think the £100 million that they spent to replace him didn't have the desired effect. I don't think they replaced particularly well. Ings, he came in and he was Villa's top scorer and he scored some decent goals and important goals. And to be fair to Villa, they did recoup a decent amount of money back, which was probably one of the best sales that that previous regime did. To get £12 million rising to £15 million from West Ham was a very good return. But at the point where he was signed, you just needed a little bit more, I think, to try and help replace Grealish, but wasn't quite there. I think Bailey has had 2 disappointing seasons, but he's starting to show decent signs this year and has scored a couple of good goals and important goals already. And Buendia is obviously out for the season and hasn't really had the effect, or hasn't really had the impact that people would have hoped. Although he does seem to be a firm fan's favourite, doesn't he? Villa fans really seem to.
If you've got a good song, it's half a battle, and Villa don't have many good songs for their players. And when their songs are semi-decent ones, I think that's half the battle. One thing that's always baffled me about that window, and I can't believe I didn't pick up on it at the time when this was happening. And we've, to be fair, we've both been complimentary of Lange so far. So this is going to be a little bit of a criticism from me, but I think it's important to look at both sides. We've said about the data, all that stuff he's changing, that's so good now, so important for Villa. Villa signed 3 players to replace someone that was playing on the left-hand side on the left wing. None of them played in that position. So Villa are never actually going to be able to replace Grealish because they didn't sign anyone who could play in that position. Bailey's best work had come from the right. Ings was a central striker, and I think Buendia's best work had come from the right as well. And he's probably a number 10. So actually, Villa tried to replace Jack Grealish, but didn't sign anyone that played in Jack Grealish's position. So I think that probably needs investigating.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I think, excuse me, Villa just thought at that point collectively that if they were getting 3 players like that in, their collective attributes would help replace Grealish. It just wasn't to be. But no, it is a very good point. And there were other players that were looked at, obviously, at that point. Moussa Diaby was actually considered at that point, but he was going to be too expensive.
Zaha was the one of that.
Zaha was put to Villa, but
he could replace Grealish.
Zaha was put to Villa, but they weren't interested. It was all all the eggs in the Bailey basket at that point. They really fancied him and thought he would come in and do the job. So,
then there's the Gerrard windows where we obviously covered Carlos and Kamara. Who I was really impressed with Carlos at the weekend. Actually, I just hope he can stay fit, improve his durability. Now for the club, Coutinho. I mean, again, everyone will associate that with Gerrard, in fairness, rather than Lange. But Coutinho, Luca Dean, Olsen, and Chambers coming on a free, so a low risk signing on a free. In fairness, Chambers. But again, so with Coutinho, for example, how much will Lange have had to do with that? Would he have had to have gone back and looked at data around that of why it was a good signing? Or was that just purely Steven Gerrard wants him?
Purely Gerrard.
And you said earlier that everyone has to sign it off.
Yeah, I mean, look, basically what tends to happen is when a new manager comes in, they will often be told, are there any players that you particularly want? During the recruitment and interview process, it will be a case of which players do you think are performing quite well at, say, under 21 level at the moment? Which players do you think are performing well at under 18 level? Give me 10 players from France who you think are performing well, 10 players from Spain, etc. And they'll go through players like that. So Lange and Christian Perslow did the initial interviews with Steven Gerrard. Lange did extensive interviews to find out what he wanted to do when he came to Villa. Was really impressed with the playing style presentation that he'd done. And I do think at the time there was going to be a Premier League team that were going to take on Steven Gerrard. So at the time, Villa, it was worth a gamble. I think it was worth a try because there was a Premier League team was going to hire Steven Gerrard.
To be fair to him, I liked what he did in the first 6 games. I thought
it was going. A Premier League team would have taken him on. He interviewed well. His presentation was excellent.
Do you think Mick Beale did his presentation for him?
He certainly helped. And so yeah, just to go back to players, typically sporting directors will ask managers about players who they think are performing well at certain countries at certain levels. And then inevitably it'll be a case of if you could sign players for Villa, who would you bring in? And Coutinho was a player that was discussed pretty quickly. It was very, very clear that Coutinho would not have joined Aston Villa if Steven Gerrard was not around. We've gone through that previously and talked about that. But then it was more down to Perslow at that time to really negotiate and get the right deal for Villa. And to be fair, at the time the money didn't seem too bad. It turned out to be a really expensive mistake, but no, it wasn't something that Lange was. Look, Coutinho wasn't a guy that was flagged up through their data analysis, shall we say?
No. Well, so overall, then, Johan Lange, success. You're saying? I think I'd agree with that.
I mean, yeah, I think he was. An outstanding success because look at where Villa were at that point. There was so much work that needed to be done behind the scenes. I think Christian Perslow and Johan Lange have both done really, really impressive things and really good things for the club. And in time, there will be certain elements that Villa miss from those two. They are moving on up now. There's a different structure. Football changes all the time. Positions change behind the scenes. And look, this is very much Emery's group now, and Emery and Vidagani and Monchi and the way they're moving things forward. But I think what the previous guys have done have helped really build strong foundations for Villa, and they can kick on from here.
Yeah, I mean, I've got my own thoughts on Perslow, but I can't dispute that he did a lot of good for the football club. I would never dispute that. And Lange, from the stuff we've discussed today, it's the same. And I wish him really well at Tottenham Hotspur. And I'm going to actually be really interested to see the kind of players that they sign and how he gets on there. So I imagine some Spurs fans might end up watching this, so they'll probably be quite encouraged by what we've discussed in this podcast. I have a quick word about Ollie Watkins and Ezri Konsa, but before we do that, let's just hear again from our sponsors, NordVPN.
If you guys are getting fed up with missing live football, then our new show sponsor, NordVPN, might be able to help you out. NordVPN is a secure and private service which works on pretty much any device, including your laptop, mobile, and smart TV. If you want to watch, let's say, some US content, it allows you to appear like you're in that country. And while you're connected, no one can find out what you're doing, including your internet service provider. The service also has threat protection baked in to protect you from intrusive website ads and malware, which is pretty dab handy. A part of NordVPN supporting 1874, the Aston Villa channel, they have given us an exclusive deal of up to 65% off and 4 months for free, which also includes Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. All you have to do is go to www.1874.io/NordVPN and sign up. All the details will also be in the description. And as always, we are truly grateful to anyone that signs up. We know that money is tight. But if you think NordVPN will help you out, it will also help us to keep the channel running.
Right, and Gregg, so we've been speculating about it since probably April, but Ollie Watkins signed his 5-year contract finally last week. How do you feel about that getting done?
Yeah, pleased for Villa, pleased for Watkins as well. You know, everybody who listens to this podcast regularly knows that I'm a big fan of Watkins and that I like him as a person as well. So, yeah, good for him that he's got his future secured. And exciting times for Villa. I think he's going to be a big part of Villa moving forward as well. Yeah, good timing on the back of a hat trick, wasn't it?
Yeah, and back in the England squad.
Yeah.
As well. Do you think if he hadn't scored that hat trick, he'd still be in the England squad? Callum Wilson is not in the squad, is he? Because he's been carrying an injury.
Yeah.
So a couple of things
Southgate,
have probably helped.
I think. Look, he hadn't scored. He'd only scored one goal, hadn't he, up until that point in the season in the Premier League. But I think what really helped was the fact that Southgate was at the Brighton game, and he absolutely bossed it, didn't he, Watkins? So
he's such a good player.
You know, I've never doubted it. I think the criticism towards him from some sections of supporters is ridiculous because his goal record and his contribution to the team backs up his importance.
Yeah, he gets assists as well. Another assist at the weekend. So even when he's not in the goals, he's getting a goal contribution. I think Ollie Watkins. I still think, and I will die on this hill, Villa can't get a better striker in than him, in my opinion, and they won't get a better striker in than him at the moment for where the club is. So everyone just needs to continue to back Ollie. I think in the main he does get the back. I think people have started to wise up and realise now what a good striker is, but there's still always those element of people that come out on social media and say we need a better striker. There isn't one. That's my opinion, and I will die on that hill.
That's what I mean. We don't have to go for every single player in the Premier League, but like, you could name probably on one hand the amount of strikers that are better than Watkins, and Villa aren't going to be able to go and sign them.
I mean, Haaland hasn't scored recently for a few games. He's only 89 now, Haaland, but he gets a hell of a lot of chances for Manchester City. Every striker misses chances. Ollie Watkins is no different. He's missed one at the weekend, but still, overall, what he offers that team, Villa cannot get a better striker than him. And I will die tomorrow, and you can put that on my tombstone, because I genuinely I've been saying that for well over a year now. Villa cannot get a better striker in than Ollie Watkins, and I absolutely love him to bits. I think he's such a good player, and I'm glad he's staying on for another 5 years. And I spoke to Jacob when I did a show with Jacob about Ezri Konsa, because he's someone who hasn't watched Villa week in, week out, and he said he was surprised at how good Ezri Konsa is. Yeah. There's 6 centre-backs in that England squad. How is Ezri Konsa not one of them?
Yeah, I mean, it's stupid now, isn't it? Like, I'm trying not to criticise Harry Maguire anymore, but how he's ahead of him, he's just
got an assist at the weekend, didn't he, Maguire? Cheeky assist for Scott McTominay, one of the most desperate performances I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, look, I mean, we've spoke about Konsa before at length and in detail, and what he's doing for Villa now, he should be getting recognised and being in the England squad. He's the way he can progressively play out from the back is what England would like to do. I think if he could be in that England team with the better quality players in front of him, then he can shine just as much as he does for Villa. He's great on the cover, he's quick, good in the air, a threat from set pieces.
Covers right back as well, which is Southgate.
Yeah, he's versatile. He's able to take on new tactical instructions from a real detailed and intense manager. He ticks all the boxes.
I mean, no disrespect to Lewis Dunk, but I watched him got absolutely run ragged at Villa Park. I don't think he's got any business being ahead of Ezri Konsa in the England pecking order. Gay plays left centre back. I can understand that. I maybe always thought the reason that he didn't get called up Konsa was because of Mings being the more dominant of the two, and Mings being left footed, and he was never going to pick both of Villa's centre backs. I kind of felt that way, but after John Stones, right centre back, I'm not seeing anyone else who I think is better suited to play. I'm not saying he should be in the England team, but when John Stones isn't there as a right centre back, and I'm not saying Ezri Konsa is as good as John Stones either, he's the natural next best, I would say. Should be in the best 4 centre backs in an England squad, in my opinion.
Look, he's worth a look, isn't he? He deserves to be in the squad for the coaches and the manager to have a proper look at him and see whether, and even give him a go to see whether he can perform, under the pressure. Because Mings had a go and Mings did it. I think Konsa deserves it too.
Maybe Tomori's ahead of him. Maybe Tomori wasn't there again. But I mean, you don't need 6 centre backs in an England squad for a start.
I don't see enough of AC Milan to know whether Tomori's playing brilliantly or whether he's in great form. So I just haven't watched enough of them. But I admire players that will go and play it in a different country like that and try and settle in. And I think that helps the England national team when it comes to big tournaments, because they can be thrown in and they're used to playing in different environments against different nationalities and opposition, whatever, however you want to call it, look at it. I admire that. I just haven't seen enough of Tomori to know whether he's playing better than Konza at the moment.
The annoying thing is, I think him not being in the squad this time round when he's on top form with the Euros coming in the summer, and we know how Southgate puts a lot of credence on players that have been around the camp before these times. That's probably, unless there's a massive injury crisis at centre back, that's him not going to the Euros, I would say.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because you've got to come in and I mean, Maddison did it, didn't he? But had Maddison had he been in the setup before the
squad before, but he'd never really played. But
there is a chance. It's just you don't. I don't know what more he can really do.
He can't do any more. That's literally the thing. He cannot do any more to get in that squad. I thought he had a ropey start to the season and ropey back end to the season before under Steven Gerrard, but then he really settled himself and just got back to his best. And him and Mings were obviously a brilliant partnership at centre half of Villa. But him and Torres are making a decent fist of being a partnership as well. He played right back on Sunday. Played well there. He is one of Villa's best players, and Villa have had one of the best defences in the Premier League over the last 12 months. So I'm not sure what more he could have done. And as I say, I don't think he actually could have done anything. Could he change allegiances? Is that something you know anything about? I'll put you on the spot.
Yeah.
Look, Portugal.
He's eligible to represent Angola and Portugal. So, but where he's at in his thinking, I don't know. But he's eligible to play for both. Yeah,
because that's what Matty Cash had to do. He kind of got in his head he wasn't going to play for England, which is probably wise because there is a lot of right backs in England. But Fraser Constantly probably still thinks he can make it, and maybe Southgate won't be there after the Euro, so perhaps he'd leave it until then. But if he declared for Portugal, I'm relatively confident looking at their centre back options that they'd call him up. I mean, Pepe's still knocking around for Portugal. I think Jose Font was in the last squad as well. So if Consa was to declare for Portugal, who are a very good team and got some very good players, he would get called up.
Yeah, we'll have to see. We'll have to see on that one. But from my understanding, it feels like he's English, isn't he?
Yeah, no, I get that. Matty Cash is English though, but he's playing for Poland. It's the same, isn't it? But yeah, that does us for this week's podcast. Really enjoyed that, Greg. So thank you very much. It was your idea to do a pod on Lange, and I think it worked well. I think people will enjoy that, and maybe it's changed some people's minds about what they thought of his time at Aston Villa. And as I say, maybe some Spurs fans have come across this as well and want to learn a bit more about how Lange operated at Villa. So yeah, I really enjoyed that. Thank you very much, Greg. And again, congratulations on becoming a father to a little golfer. No shows for the rest of the week, obviously, because it's international break, but we'll be back next week with all the usual jazz that we do on the channel leading up to a game. And Greg and myself will come back next week and do another hour with you as well. So all that's left to say is subscribe to the channel with your post notifications on. Give the video a like if you're watching on YouTube, and leave us a comment as well with how you feel Lange's time at Aston Villa went. Wherever you are taking in this podcast, if you could subscribe, like, do all the nice things, give 5 stars, do all the nice things that you can do for us, that would really help us and we'd really appreciate it. Yeah, have a good rest of the week and have a good Villa-free weekend up the Villa.